We're heading to Sky Andaluz. Content and want to stay updated with all our latest videos, please consider subscribing to our channel. It's completely free and ensures you won't miss out on any new uploads. Just click the subscribe button below and join our community today. Subscribe. Well, here I am with Estefan, the founder of these facilities that we have right behind us, Sky Andaluz, which I think is a place dedicated to spreading knowledge about astronomy and showing people the world of astronomy visually, right? Tell us a bit, Estefan, about how this project was born and what brought you here to set all of this up.
Well, we could do like a psychologist and start from the very beginning. It started when I was 8 years old, and that's actually true. And with my passion, the first astronomy books that I loved. Later, when I got older, at 17, I was living in Brazil at the time. I bought myself a telescope in England, took it to Brazil, and they stopped me at customs. They made me pay a fortune, and I cried because I thought my father was going to scold me for it. And that's where the second phase began. I thought that with a telescope, everything would be solved. But in reality, a 4-inch telescope, not 110 millimeters. You could see the moon, Jupiter, and Saturn, and everything else I had heard about. At first, it was hard to find them, and that's how it went. Later, as the years went by, I had a 150 millimeter telescope, which also didn't really... When I started to see some galaxies, but really it was more about suspecting the galaxy than actually seeing it. And I started to have the problems of someone who thinks that the telescopes you see on the market will solve everything. That condition is called aperture fever. You always want more. And when I already had a 250 millimeter one, I started dreaming again about an even bigger one. And in this search, by chance, I came across an article about Frédéric Géard from Stellarzac, who had installed a 1-meter telescope in France. When I saw that, I was blown away. I think that's how you say it in Spanish, and I really wanted it. And on top of that, my parents, who were from Brazil, were coming. I'm Swiss-Brazilian, and I lived in Switzerland. And my parents were coming from Brazil, and I, very nervous, tried to see if during the week they were coming to France, it would be possible to rent Frédéric's telescope. What I didn't know was that I was his first customer. So we rented the telescope, and I loved it because everything that used to be frustrating for me, like seeing things with, peripheral vision and all that, was no longer necessary. You could see things just by looking at them. Of course.
Of course.
And with that, it's...
that you went from a 110 millimeter telescope to a 250, to a 1-meter telescope.
Yes. It was really seeing the spirals of M51. Seeing the galaxy that's near M13, like the globular cluster, there's a small galaxy that's very close by, so being able to show off those kinds of things, even though we assume it's not a universe, it's a universe that's close to the galaxy, with no one, because no one in my circle, let's say, was interested in this subject. And over the years there in Switzerland as a banker, there came a time when I felt it was time for me to think about doing something else. Frédéric used to rent out the telescope to just one person for a week, a farmhouse and the telescope for a week. And I liked, and especially liked, the idea of making it available to the general public, to someone like Stefan at 12 or 14 years old, and not just for older enthusiasts. So in order to reach this kind of audience, I needed to have slightly better access than Frederick had. And then we had to find the right place. It was something that really obsessed me because I had already had bad experiences with the quality of the sky, not just because of light pollution, but also due to what is called, let's say, the conditions, the movement, the turbulence in the air. And with that, the movement of the stars, and especially the nebulae and galaxies and everything else.
Exactly, because the location of this place isn't something, it's a coincidence. It's a coincidence indeed. Yes.
It was a short search. It took about 3 or 4 years, spending, 2,000 hours in front of a computer screen or something like that. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but more than 1,000, definitely more than 1,000. The challenge was to find the exact place that matched not only in terms of light pollution, but also clear skies, which was very difficult to find data on. Here in Spain, maybe people don't worry about it as much, but I came from Switzerland where clear skies are important. And even here in the spring, we often had to tell people, sorry, but it's not today, it's tomorrow or whenever. So it had to be clear skies. It had to be a plateau as high as possible, but not to the point of freezing people. And it had to have low light pollution while still being at a reasonable distance from cities like Malaga or Granada.
So that it would be a relatively accessible place for everyone.
Exactly. The idea wasn't to bring in enthusiasts, although that happened to me too. I went all the way to the border between Algeria and Morocco. Because there's also a plateau there, and I discovered that the Sahara at 1,300 meters can be amazing. But if a bit of wind comes through, there's dust. It's just awful. So as someone who was obsessed with these things, I thought, Sahara Majerabia, I get there, there's a bit of wind, and when I see the dust, I say, no way.
Because this kind of dust isn't ideal for the instruments we have here, since we have 2 telescopes here, right? Yes?
So at a certain point, for my own personal enjoyment, I bought one with Frederick because Frederick, besides having one, he had built his own 1-meter telescope. And over time, he returned to his hobby of building telescopes. He discovered that more than renting out telescopes, what he really enjoyed was building them. So he went back to his first love, and I was one of his first clients for whom he built one. The first was a 22-inch, that is 560 millimeters. And after that, when I decided I was going to start a business like this to captivate people, I also looked for a second telescope of the largest size that people would feel comfortable with on a ladder and that had good optical quality. So a second telescope was made, this one 28 inches. Why are they measured in inches? Because the only builders you could find to make this type of mirror are in the United States. So unfortunately, they measure in inches and not in millimeters. In millimeters, the number comes out to 711 millimeters, which isn't, let's say, a very common number.
Which is no joke either. A 711 millimeter mirror is a serious telescope.
Yes, it's the entry level for giant telescopes. For people with a lot of experience, for example, Frederick, they notice the difference. It's a big jump from a 22-inch to a 28-inch. That's where it really makes a difference. After that, the improvement is a bit better, but it doesn't really affect things like colors and so on anymore. With a size like 711, planetary nebulae show colors and stars like glass, etc. That's easy too. So there's that aspect, the Orion Nebula. It has colors, it's purple, you can see it, all of that really.
And it's the ideal balance, let's say, between having a certain comfort while observing and things becoming much more complicated.
Exactly. Putting someone on a 1-meter telescope at 3.5 meters high in the middle of a crowd, people would be shaking. That was one of the major limitations there has been. And even so, since I still suffer from aperture fever every now and then while walking the dog, I start dreaming about a bigger one. And then I remember all the problems that would cause, and I tell myself, Estefan, calm down, you have the right size. If you need to make a second telescope, make a second one of the same size in an even darker place. But don't do it. If you were going to do something, the logical thing wouldn't be to make a bigger one. It would be to make the same one in a very dark place where you could... It's when...
That it's the sky that makes the difference. Exactly.
What could still make the difference would be the sky, but access there, by definition, if it's a perfect sky, you'll have terrible access and you guys won't come visit me.
Here, besides the 2 telescopes that are back there and that we'll see later, we have a planetarium right behind us as well, don't we? because you wanted to round out the project by also adding that educational aspect, right?
Exactly, exactly. The idea is, let's say the motto here at Sky Andaluz is the following. We only have one chance to make a good first impression of astronomy. And if you go straight to the telescope, if the person doesn't know what the sky is, what nebulae are and all that, it becomes very abstract no matter how much you look, even though with a 28-inch at least you can see things. No, even if in the case of galaxies it's just a blurry spot, but you see it directly with direct vision, not indirect vision and all that, but people don't know what it is. So again, thinking about the teenager or the young Stefan who wanted to amaze his family, it seemed to me that the full experience starts with first a planetarium, like how people are often amazed in science parks and similar places, but when people are in a planetarium, they're usually amazed, but then they leave and they're back in the city. Whereas here, you get the complete experience. You have the science park experience with the planetarium and the movie that explains the universe and all that. But then what you saw in the movie, like you can actually see with your own eyes through the two telescopes. It's a
global experience. Exactly. We go through the educational part, being able to see all this in a planetarium. But then on top of that, we have the experience of the two telescopes, being able to observe it, and the experience of having the real planetarium above us.
Exactly, because when people come out of the planetarium and suddenly see that the sky is full of stars, which most of us aren't familiar with, since most of us live in cities and the streetlights are what they are. And people from rural areas often don't have that culture of appreciating the sky, even though they have it. So here, it's a special case where you come out of the planetarium and you have the sky right in front of you. At this time of year, we have the Milky Way. We can show the center of the galaxy with Sagittarius and see the rest. Yes, it's how I would have liked my first experience to be. And so far, I have to say that everyone who came and left reviews on Google gave us 5 stars, so I think we did something right.
You definitely did something right. Exactly, and that's what we're going to check out ourselves for the rest of the night in just a little while, and we'll be showing you more about the Sky Andaluz Project, which at least to me seems like a really, really beautiful initiative.
Thank you so much, Luis Miguel. Yes, seeing people leave here happy from different countries. We've already had Greeks, we've had Russians, we've had Germans, we've had English, Spaniards, with most of the audience being Spanish. And seeing that it's a universal language that touches everyone is truly delightful for me. It's a pleasure to be able to give that pleasure to people. It's something many times after the observations, Flavia and I leave with a smile on our faces at 2 a.m. People enjoyed it, they were happy, and that's a pleasure. That's the greatest satisfaction, exactly. From something you understand. You're not doing something you don't understand. Yes, of course, of course. Well, Estefan, tell us a bit about this instrument we have here. So this is the small one. It's a 22-inch or 560 millimeter. It was the first large telescope I made for myself, for my personal use. The entire structure, let's say, was made by a French friend of mine named Frédéric Geya over there in France. It was a commission I requested. And the mirror was, now I can't quite remember who had it made. It was made for him at the time. He had it for himself, crafted by an artisan from California. That's why the measurements are in inches, because the mirrors come from the United States. It was made to fit into a small car, but in the end, it's here, let's say, permanently.
You have it here in a fixed setup? Exactly, it is.
Permanently fixed here, exactly.
So we're talking about how many inches?
22 inches.
What is its light gathering ratio?
It's an f4. This one here is an f4, and even so, if you later see in the film, it comes out as 560 times 4, and still it's less than the other one, which has an f of 3.5.
Very good. Have you ever transported this telescope? Have you ever taken it in your vehicle?
Yes, I mainly took it from the end of Frederica to my house, and at home I didn't use it much, but I left it at home in Switzerland, and then it was moved from Switzerland and made the thousands of kilometers from Switzerland to here. So yes, we transported it by vehicle for those 2,000 and something kilometers. Yes, it fits without any problem. You can remove this here. There are the carbon tubes. This part here comes off, so only the box stays here. The carbon tubes are separated, and the part, I always forget the name, the top part can also be disassembled, where the spider, the focuser, and all that are, right? Exactly where the spider and all that is. It's more like a little box. So in the end, it becomes super compact in size. Most of a telescope is just air, right? Of course, it's not
Estefan, tell us, a moment ago we mentioned that we're looking at one of the largest amateur telescopes in Spain. It's the
number 2, but the difference with the largest one is minimal. There's a 3 centimeter difference between the largest one in Spain and this one here for visual astronomy. I'm not talking about research astronomy. The one at Calar Alto also has a 1.20 meter telescope, which on special occasions you can rent and look through, but only in groups. As for this one here, it might be the largest in Spain that you can rent for yourself. If you have the passion and the desire, you can rent Sky Andaluz for a day or for a week. Well, maybe not a week, because I should mention that there are also thousands of other people, but for a night or something like that, you can have it all to yourself. So in this sense, it's definitely the largest, and if not for the general public, it's one of the 2 largest in Spain.
We could maybe say that it's really it's the largest in Andalusia. That's
for sure the
largest in Andalusia and probably the largest in Spain that's accessible to the public.
Yes, that can be accessed by the public. The difference, look, we and the people from ITA are in the same league when it comes to size. The 3 centimeters that make the difference, honestly, when I chose the size of the telescope, I didn't know which was the largest in Spain. My main concern was what was the largest size that people would feel comfortable with on a telescope. I wanted it to be as big as possible, but on the other hand, since I already had the experience of climbing ladders in the middle of the night for telescopes even larger than 1 meter, etc., I knew there was a limit to how high we could go. And on the other hand, it had to be big enough so that I could show a galaxy. And people could see the galaxy, because with telescopes of, let's say, normal size, you have to use indirect vision to see galaxies. Many
times it's just a little blur, you have to look a bit to the side.
Exactly, and explaining to a group of 15 people who have never seen a telescope in their lives that that's how you have to look wasn't fun. Another thing that is also lost that you don't get with smaller telescopes is the colors in planetary nebulae. So here, with a telescope of this size, we'll see today and tonight, I show you the cat's eye and you're seeing blue, but really clear blue. And if you're young, they can even see the reddish purple of the hydrogen. Because hydrogen emits red and the blue comes from oxygen. So young people can even see the red here. I envy them like crazy, but I can't see it. And so the whole discussion was precisely about which focal length we were going to use to have the smallest possible telescope, but on the other hand, still have good image quality. And on the other hand, how and how much that was related to the size of the mirror. I spent years at home, and you would have thought I was crazy because I would put a ladder in my room, climb up and down to figure out up to here is fine, more than that isn't good. So we decided on a 28-inch because the people who make that kind of mirror are Americans. And unfortunately, they don't measure in millimeters. In millimeters, that's 711 millimeters of mirror, and reaching an f3.5 so that people in the middle of the night can discover as much as possible, as high as possible. And even so, in my opinion, we're at the limit of what we can ask of people. It's here. Up to this height, we have to ask people to look at M57, the Ring Nebula, at this time of year, which is right above. People have to climb up here. And young children, the little ones, even have to lean over here to be able to reach the height.
Of course, if we had gone those 3 centimeters higher you mentioned, supposedly there would be one more step. It is
everything, because 3 centimeters times 3.5, so we're talking about 11 or 12 centimeters more. 11 or 12 centimeters more is one more step. And there you are here, and then elderly people, especially women, would go. We already have the mobility problem.
Certain people with slightly reduced mobility already have difficulties.
They already have difficulties.
What focal distance are we talking about?
Of 3.5. So we're talking about a focal distance of 2.45 meters in this case. And also because besides that, you end up adding, despite everything, there are the feet and all that. So it ends up being more than, if it's really vertical, we're talking about almost 2.60 meters in height.
Exactly. This truly remarkable and impressive telescope is also entirely handmade. Isn't that absolutely incredible?
Yes, that type of telescope can't be found commercially. I think the largest ones I've seen for sale are 22 inches. I think now Skywatch makes something like that. If it's not 20, it's 22. I
think there's an American brand, Obsession. Yes, they don't reach that size.
I think the largest they have is 25, and I'm not sure about that. They managed to make a 30, but they clearly didn't have the technology and went crazy with a 30-inch. So there are just a few 30-inch or 28-inch ones I don't really remember from Obsession. But the biggest, yes, I used to dream about the obsession ones. I saw the size, etc., because I suffered from aperturitis for quite a while. I don't know if you know what aperturitis is. Aperturitis is the tendency that amateur astronomers have where they buy a telescope, see what it can do.
We always want to go bigger. Exactly?
Exactly. So having suffered from aperturitis and now having the experience of up to 40 inches, a meter, in this case, a 1 meter mirror, and Frederick, who was my friend and the builder of the telescope, which is 1 meter and has that, the two of us came to the conclusion that aperturitis has to stop at 28 inches, at 700 millimeters, 750 millimeters. Anything beyond that, we're already at an exaggeration where the cost-benefit ratio just isn't there. But if you want to take aperturitis, let's say, to its logical conclusion, you have to reach this size.
Of course, because the issue of collimation. And all of this is relatively simple. Going any bigger already makes things much more complicated. Exactly.
To go bigger, to have a telescope, let's say, that really makes a difference at this size, you have to go beyond 1 meter. You need to have a telescope with a mirror of 1 meter 5, 1 meter 10 to be able to reach that. And with a mirror of 1 meter 5 or 1 meter 10, we're talking about more than 3.5, 4 meters in the middle of the night. I don't know why, but almost no one is comfortable with that. There is a telescope in Texas with a 1 meter 20 mirror owned by a private individual, but generally people stop at 1 meter. And for those who have already had the 1 meter and have had this one, like in Frederick's case, I heard him say, and I was very pleased to hear him say it, that if he had to do it all over again, he would have stopped at this size. You can already make out the spirals. Even here, where the sky isn't the darkest on the planet, it's a good sky, but it does have a bit of light pollution. You can already start to see the spirals in the Whirlpool galaxy Messier 51, which for me is the ultimate test of the size you need. Well, and the Orion Nebula, so it
must be a real treat.
Yes, in the end, the telescope is usually motorized. I have to use the joystick for the motor for people for M42 so they can look through it with me. Exactly, so the nebula moves across the field of view here, very bright. At this time of year, what I show to tell the story of star formation is the Swan Nebula M17. So what I generally do when people come is to show them how stars evolve, and with a telescope, that's a real pleasure because they can see everything. So we start with M17, they see the illuminated nebula shaped like a swan. Then we move on to M11 or M52, that is open clusters, to explain that after the dust clears, we reach the open cluster. And I'm showing in sequence how the open cluster breaks apart, and I show them albireo because with that you have two very different colors from each other and a star that's in quotes individual. And I end by saying everything comes to an end one day, even for stars, and that's when I show them the Ring Nebula, or I always show them the Ring Nebula. But I also often supplement with the Cat's Eye Nebula or the Emerald Nebula because there even the not-so-young can see colors. There are young people who see blue in the Ring Nebula, and some have even told me they see yellow. But the vast majority of people don't see any colors. So that's why we move on to the Cat's Eye or the Emerald Nebula, so people can see colors too.
Well, we've just finished the planetarium session. An outreach talk about the world of astronomy as it applies to amateur astronomers. Really very, very interesting. And it gives you full context for what we're about to do next. Observing through telescopes under a truly unbelievable sky. It's amazing, and it has nothing to envy from what I've seen at some of the most important astronomical observatories in Spain.
Did you see it? Yes. Now don't touch the telescope, just look, okay? How were we seeing it before? Exactly. And right next to it, an entire galaxy. Yes, that's a tiny galaxy. It's just to brag that you saw the galaxy near M13.
While it's 20 to 2 in the morning, we've already been observing here at Sky Andaluz for at least a couple of hours with the 70-centimeter telescope. And honestly, we've seen a ton of objects. It's amazing how things look through this telescope, which in many cases doesn't have anything to envy from larger telescopes, like in my case, where I've had the chance to observe. Through the 1.23-meter telescope at Calar Alto, many of the objects we see through this telescope are just as impressive. We can see colors in the planetary nebulae, and we can make out structures in some of the truly spectacular nebulae, which you can only see through telescopes of this caliber. Well, this has been Sky Andaluz. As you've seen, it's an incredibly exciting project created by Estefan and Flavia, who have decided to leave a legacy to society in the form of bringing the universe and everything in it closer to people. As you've seen, in a unique setting, under an exceptional sky, and with truly spectacular facilities that are capable of transporting you, I can vouch for this, to distant regions of the universe through the eyepiece. That's it for another week of the Natural Portraits video. We'll see each other again next week with more photography and nature here on Natural Portraits. Goodbye.